The Kremlin is suddenly warning about the end of the world. Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov says the escalating conflict around Iran feels like a perfect storm, and even suggested that it may seem as if the world is heading toward catastrophe. At the same time, Moscow is calling for de-escalation. Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov held the talks with UAE Foreign Minister about the situation around Iran. According to the Russian Foreign Minister, both sides expressed deep concern and called for immediate steps to reduce military tensions in the region. They also stressed the need to stop attacks that cause civilian casualties and damage infrastructure, both in the Gulf states and inside Iran. And there is something deeply cynical about this. Russia, the country that launched the largest war in Europe since World War II, is now lecturing the world about de-escalation and protecting civilians. For years, its missiles and drones have been hitting Ukrainian cities, power plants, hospitals and homes. Ukraine has received 11 requests from partners countries asking for help in countering drone attacks. Volodymyr Zelensky says the requests came from countries neighboring Iran, from European states and from the United States. Many of them are now facing the same threat Ukraine has lived with for years: missiles and Iranian-type drones. According to Zelensky, Ukraine has already responded to some of these requests with the specific solutions and practical support. For 4 years, Russia has been attacking Ukrainian cities with Shahed drones, forcing Ukraine to build one of the most experienced anti-drone defenses in the world. Now that battlefield experience, from interceptor drones to electronic warfare and air defense tactics, is something other countries suddenly want to learn. The country that once asked the world to help defend its skies is now being asked to help defend the skies of others.
For now, it is too early to speak about other details. I think next week, when the experts are on site, they will assess the situation and provide assistance, because they will arrive already with the capacity to help. Then we will evaluate everything and move forward. Let's wait for the first meetings.
For many years, Viktor Orban and Robert Fico have been telling Europe the same story, that Hungary and Slovakia simply cannot live without Russian oil. But reality is starting to challenge that narrative. Tankers carrying non-Russian crude are already arriving in Croatia. From there, the oil can travel through the Janov pipeline straight to Hungary and Slovakia. And suddenly something becomes clear: an alternative does exist. Yes, it's more expensive, about 60% more than Russian Urals crude. But the moment that alternative appears, the argument about no other option begins to collapse. Because if the oil can come from somewhere else, the issue is no longer technical, it's political. Traditionally, Orban and Fico used the energy argument to slow down or block European support for Ukraine, including the latest 90 billion euro package. But after Russian strike damaged the Druzhba pipeline running through Ukraine, Budapest was first to order tankers with oil from Libya and other suppliers, more than 1 million tons. And that changes the entire conversation, because once alternatives exist, dependence on Russian energy starts to look less like necessity and more like a political choice. But despite all this political theater, Ukraine will still receive the money. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the European Union will deliver the 90 billion euro loan package for Ukraine in 2026 and 2027, even if some governments try to block it. Speaking in Brussels, she made it very clear: Europe's credibility and security are on the line. All 27 EU leaders already agreed to the plan last December, yet the final decision is still stuck in political maneuvering, largely because of Hungary. Von der Leyen says the EU will fulfill its commitments, because supporting Ukraine is no longer just about solidarity, it's about Europe's own security. European leaders are speaking more openly about Iran's role in the escalation in the Middle East. In Brussels, officials say Iranian missiles and drones have already become part of wars far beyond the Gulf region, including the war in Ukraine. For years, Iranian drones have been used to attack Ukrainian cities, energy infrastructure and civilian targets. What once seems like a distant regional problem is now being seen as a part of a much wider global security crisis. At the same time, European officials point to the growing coordination between Moscow and Tehran. And while Russia and Iran deepen their military cooperation, Ukraine is offering help to partners in the Gulf to defend against drone attacks.
Iran's subsequent attacks sow terror in the wider region with missiles and drones that unfortunately Ukraine has known for years already. If anyone was not feeling it before, then we feel it now that we are at the turning point. The premises that have guided global affairs for decades can no longer be assumed, be it in politics or international law. In this context, to advance European Union's interests, it is critical we look at the wider perspective.
The events of the past 9 days have finally cracked open a window of opportunity for change. But they have also exposed how far a desperate regime clinging to the remnants of power is willing to go. Iran's attacks on the Gulf, including in the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman, they are condemnable, they are unjustifiable, and they must stop immediately. Just as every member state must know for certain that we will stand together to face down any threat.
The war in the Middle East has exposed an uncomfortable truth about global security priorities. In just the first week of fighting in the Gulf region, about $40 billion were spent on military operations, roughly the same amount European countries spent in an entire year supporting Ukraine. This comparison was highlighted by Finland's President Alexander Stubb, reflecting on the broader geopolitical consequences of the conflict.
If Ukraine had received the same level of air defense support that Israel received in the first week of the conflict in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine might have ended much earlier. In just 1 week, roughly $40 billion were spent there, which is about the same amount European countries spend in a year supporting Ukraine.
According to Stubb, the escalation around Iran could also create unexpected dynamics for the war in Ukraine. The regional crisis may complicate military cooperation between Tehran and Moscow, as Iran has been one of Russia's key partners in providing drone technology used in attacks against Ukrainian cities. However, Russia has already adapted to some extent. Stubb noted that Moscow now operates 2 factories producing Shahed-type drones based on Iranian technology, meaning the drone threat will not disappear quickly. Another important factor is oil prices. The surge in global energy prices caused by the Middle East conflict could increase Russia's revenues and give the Kremlin additional resources to finance its war. So the new conflict creates a complicated picture. It may open strategic opportunities for Ukraine, while at the same time creating new economic and geopolitical risks. Russia is rapidly losing ground in the global arms market. A new report by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute shows Russian arms exports collapsed by 64% over the past 5 years. Moscow's share of the global market fell from 21% to less than 7%. The country that launched the largest war in Europe since World War II is now losing the arms market itself. Russia is now only the 3rd largest exporter, behind the United States and France. It is also the only country in the global top 10 whose arms sales are sharply declining. Today, most of Russia's remaining buyers are just a few countries: India, China, and Belarus. At the same time, the war dramatically reshaped another statistic. Ukraine has become the world's largest arms importer. Between 2021 and 2025, it received almost 10% of global arms imports. Weapons for Ukraine now come from at least 36 countries, with the United States, Germany, and Poland among the largest suppliers. Russia's invasion has flipped the global arms market upside down. The aggressor is losing customers, while the country defending itself has become the center of the world's largest military support effort.
But we always said we were open to share the experience from this tragic war, because we see on a daily basis how modern warfare evolves. And of course, the defense industry, both in Ukraine and globally, needs to keep up with that progress.
The world hasn't seen oil prices like this in years. As war escalates in the Middle East, global oil markets are racing towards historic highs. Analysts warn that if the conflict continues to intensify, prices could approach record levels. The crisis around Iran threatens oil supplies from the Persian Gulf, one of the most critical energy hubs on the planet. Any disruption or blockade of the shipping routes, especially in the Strait of Hormuz, could sharply reduce global supply. For the global economy, this means more expensive fuel, renewed inflation pressure and greater instability. And paradoxically, for Russia, higher oil prices could translate into additional revenues that the Kremlin may use to finance its war against Ukraine. Ukrainian citizens were held in handcuffs, blindfolded and interrogated in Russian. These are the details Kyiv revealed about the detention of Ukrainian cash-in-transit workers in Hungary. According to Ukraine's foreign ministry, although the men had the legal status of witnesses, they were transported with their eyes covered and hands in handcuffs, while their phones and personal belongings were confiscated. They were unable to inform their families or employers where they were being held. During questioning, the detainees were not allowed to testify in Ukrainian and were interrogated in Russian. They were also denied access to lawyers and prevented from meeting Ukrainian consular officials. Ukraine says these actions may constitute serious violations of international law and is demanding accountability from Hungary. Russia's anthem has been heard again at the Paralympic Games for the first time since 2014. While Russia continues its war against Ukraine, destroying cities and killing civilians, its symbols are returning to the global sports arena. Despite sanctions and the so-called neutral status, Russian athletes are gradually reappearing in international competitions, and with them, the symbolism that many believed should remain outside the stadium. For many observers, this looks less like sport and more like a serious blow to the credibility of international competitions. That's all for now. For more content about Ukraine and the world, please subscribe.